All right, so again, good morning. The due now is up and listed. April 3rd, credit default swaps. I'll give you guys about 2 minutes to finalize it. This should have been done last night. Again, you guys need to get this stuff done prior to the morning of the class, simply because if you're looking this up and researching and trying to fill this stuff in the morning of, you're already too late. Okay, you already have no idea what we're about to discuss. So these do nows are really for the night before. I don't know how hard I have to stress that. But again, if you guys look at your attendance on Scheduler, many of you were marked absent for Tuesday, Thursday, and Monday because your do nows were done late. That will continue to be the case until you guys do them in advance as you were informed. All right. But again, if you didn't, you can look into the credit default swaps right now, CDSs. Do that. I'll give you guys about 60 more seconds. If you're already finished with it, sit tight. All right, give you guys about 30 to 60 seconds left. I'm going to mute myself and I'll be back. All right, let's move on. So let's take a look deeper now. Again, as I had mentioned, we'll get Mr. Hood on a call with us more than likely on Monday. We need to get him a guest FLHS account. We are unable to allow people into our Zoom sessions unless they have an FLHS account. Obviously, he doesn't have one. As an educator, I was not notified that they could not access with their own personal email addresses. Therefore, we tried to get him into new apps. It didn't work out. We will get him in on Monday or Tuesday, most likely. Okay? With that, you guys can unmute yourselves. A credit default swap decreases what, Frida? What does a credit default swap decrease?
The credit default swap is like a loan. It's like a insurance that decreases the risk from losses of defaults.
Good. It decreases risk. That's a terrible way to spell risk. There we go. It decreases risk. That is going to be the focus of what we discuss today. Now, Mary, I saw you had your hand up. Question? Okay, I'll assume that that's a no. All right. So a credit default swap decreases risk. That is exactly what we're going to discuss today. Before we do that, something that I did want Mr. Hood to discuss with you that he's not here for is something that is kind of near and dear to me in terms of what's happening today. So a lot of small businesses today get the benefit of applying for the Paycheck Protection Program. It's basically a program for small businesses to be able to apply for 2.5 times their monthly payroll. It's a loan that would turn into a grant and then be forgiven. Okay. So if you have a $50,000 payroll, you'll be qualified for what's 2.5 times 50,000?
125,000.
There you go. So you'd be eligible for a $125,000 loan, which would turn into a grant and which would then be forgiven if it was only used for rent, utilities, and payroll. And you cannot lay anyone off. The recommendation is that you make a brand new corporate bank account, and that's where you pay those bills out of. That way you can track all of the costs from that account, because you have to show it to the bank in order for the bank to approve that your loan is forgiven. Make sense? So
Yes.
that's happening today. Is mayhem out there right now, as so many businesses are not ready. So many banks are not prepared.
Yeah, JP Morgan isn't ready, they just said.
Yeah, so JP Morgan said that last night. Goldman Sachs said that last night.
Citibank, I think, is ready.
Morgan Stanley said that last night. There's a few banks that did say that they were prepared. There's a few other banks that are definitely not prepared. Companies that already laid people off. Shannon, good question. If you laid anyone off before after February 15th, you must rehire those positions, not those people, right? But if you had 15 employees on February 15th, you need to have 15 employees by, I think it's June 15th, in order for your loan to be forgiven. So you will have to bring people back on. So here's the situation my wife's business faces. She has 13 staff as of, I think, December. As of February, 2 of her staff members left. Well, she never replaced them, right? That means she still needs to hire more people, even though she didn't even terminate them. Because the loan forgiveness says she has to have the same number of staff that she had in February, even if she didn't fire them, even if they quit. And even if she laid them off in January, before the virus hit, she would still have to bring them back. Now, again, this doesn't cost her anything, because in theory, she is being given enough to cover their costs. But we have to be careful that she's not spending this money on other necessities for the business. Because if you do, the loan will not be forgiven and you will have to pay 1% interest on this loan. Make sense? If you think this Paycheck Protection Program is a good idea, type a smiley face into the chat window. I'll go first. I think it's a pretty good idea. If you think there are businesses that will take advantage of this, put a smiley face. No, put a sad face. If you think there are businesses that will find ways to take advantage of this, put a sad face. I'm going to go with a sad face. Serena is a schemer. Serena said, can she hire someone in the family? Okay, now, Serena, here's my theory. Yes. So I'm not on her payroll. I'm not going to say she should do this. I'm not even going to bring this up. But let's say she needs to hire someone. I do a lot of work for her office. I do a lot of their design work, a lot of their marketing work. I'm working with them right now on their finances to input for these loans. But I do that because it's family. Now, if they need to add people to payroll, it kind of would make sense to add me to payroll if you just have to add numbers, right? Just so you can forgive the loan. So there will be businesses that maybe have to do that. There might be restaurants that don't need 15 people. So what do? You keep 10, you hire 5 friends, you just send your friends a check. I have no idea if it's going to work like that. I assume there will be plenty of shady things that happen. I know a lot of people talking about that. But Serena, that's a great question. If she had 13 employees, now she has 10, well, she has to find 3 more. All right, how do you find 3 more? I don't know. Do you need 3 more? If the answer is yes, then rehire them. If the answer is no, then do you hire them anyway? Or do you just put your friends and family down and cut them a check? Is that really a thing? Or do you fight it and you say, no, they quit. I didn't fire them, so it's not my fault. So that is a little bit more research that would have to be done and a little bit more of a discussion into how, right, they go about enforcing some of this. But here's the next thing. How many of you guys think that there will be banks that take advantage of this? Type yup if you think banks will take advantage. Yes, there are definitely banks that will take advantage of it. There are definitely banks that will try to keep certain facts from you. There are definitely banks that will try to keep certain, there are banks that will look at your finances and say, oh, no, look, you paid for something that wasn't rent or utilities. Oh, look, here's the fine print. You owe us 1% interest and we can't forgive it. That will definitely happen. You have my word. A bank's job is to earn money. Let me take this one step further. I, in all my glory, as always trying to be smart, found out that New York City is one of the shadiest, most corrupt places in the world. Ask me how I know.
How do you know?
How do you know, Mr. Power?
Oh my God, I'm so glad that you guys asked. So, there are multiple businesses I know. And again, I have a network of a lot of friends and family and relatives that do have small businesses or medium-sized businesses in the city. One of the things that New York City did was, as soon as the PPP the Paycheck Protection Program that Trump signed and that Congress passed, as soon as that was in the works, New York City, in all of their genius, decision-making capability, decided to try and successfully emailed most of the businesses in New York City to offer them 4 to 5% loans. And they call it the New York City Employee Retention Grant Program. This is one of them. Now, what does this say that's different than PPP? Well, 40% of payroll will be covered. Okay? They will give you a loan. Only 40% will be covered, which means guess what you're paying back? Yeah, thank you, Ethan. 60%. This is only one of the programs. There are more. There's another one right here. Look, oh, look. The Small Business Continuity Loan Fund. So they give it these really grandiose names, right? To try to make you feel like they're doing something good for you. When in reality, 0% interest of loans up to $75,000. Well, what happens if you take out a loan up to $100,000? It's no longer 0% interest. And guess what? This entire loan is not forgivable. So here's what New York City did. They sent these two opportunities, and I'm going to say quote unquote opportunities, because to me, it's a little bit of conniving, deceiving, trashy tactic to launch this minutes, days, hours, whatever you want to say it, just before the Paycheck Protection Program was launched, which forgives 100% of your loan. Why would New York City do this? Unmute your mic. Let's go with, don't just say take advantage. Explain something to me. So, Shannon?
I think they did that because like everyone was so excited about getting the paychecks or the monthly paychecks. So people would think this loan program or grant program was going to be good as well.
Yeah, so they're rushing through it to get their program through. Well, New York City needs money, right? So if we're offering you 0% interest, and then you eat for 75 grand, and we get you to take out a loan for 250 grand, is there 0% interest?
No.
Nope. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So New York City, at the same time that the government's putting something together, New York City's also putting something together which doesn't cover as much as the federal government, right? And they send it out without promoting the federal government plan, which is better than their plan, and they use similar language. The Business Continuity Loan Fund, Employee Retention Grant Program. The grant only covers 40% of payroll. Okay? This only covers 0% interest for $75,000. There will be people who take out these loans thinking they will be 100% forgiven, and they did not read the fine print, and they are thinking they're applying for the Paycheck Protection Program, but they are applying for the wrong fund. This will happen. Who's got a thought on that? Is that New York City's fault? Is it the federal government's fault? Is it the business owner's fault for not reading it and not doing enough research? What do you guys think? Unmute and let's hear.
I think it's a business owner's fault because, like, I guess everything that you have to, like, read about in terms of your loans and stuff, you have to, like, do the research first to then understand what's the better loan for your company. Just like you said, like the Paycheck Protection Program is clearly a better loan offer than the New York City loans. So I think a business owner should be catching up with the news to like really understand what's the better loan for their company.
I agree with him. I had the same thought where they would actually confuse like the two programs. Even though I feel like it is their responsibility to pay attention to like the fine print, I kind of feel bad for them because the thing is New York City is like so greatly diverse, and like for instance, I live like in a community that's very like focused on one race group. So I know a lot of like business owners may not have, the best terminology or like the best understanding of these programs. So they are kind of trapping these owners into thinking that, there's a possibility, or if there's owners that are looking for these alternatives to save their businesses, the first source they would go to is the New York City government website. And this is like that's the main thing they're advertising. They're now giving them the alternatives. Like I know for my parents, I know they didn't know of certain programs such as like unemployment. They didn't know about the new bill that was being passed.
Yeah. Not a lot of people no. And that's sometimes it's people's fault, sometimes it's the government's fault. Sometimes it's the bank's fault if they're not upfront. This happens to me. For me to have intellectual people send me these links from New York City saying this is what we have to apply for the forgivable loan, and I read it, and then I read through the fine print, and I respond, this is not that. That scares me, right? Because that means there are people that are, more in a rush or more in a drastic situation that are really rushing through this, that are doing whatever they need to. And in reality, they are more than likely going to apply for the wrong support. And that could be tragic because you'll be taking out loans or taking on debt that you maybe did not need to take on. And that is actually sad, if you ask me.
But also like these, like the one that's showing on the screen right now, like they cover 100 employees and lower. So those are even smaller businesses than the extent that's offered in the current bill. So it's also not only is it affecting the companies, but it's also employing the employees and the people, like the United States population, which is what the government is trying to avoid, which is all of these like all of these unemployment numbers.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the issue. The issue is that, the federal is 500 or less employees. This one is 100 or less employees, which is really good for small businesses, but then you're not forgiving the whole loan. You're not even forgiving it at all. You're just saying zero interest. For how long? Right? That's what they don't tell you. When do you add interest? Right? At what point? That's what they don't have here. So this to me is a little bit disingenuous by New York City. I think it's kind of crappy, for the lack of a better way to put it. And I'm sure this is happening all over the country. So I wanted to share that, just a heads up. Make sure you guys are researching. If you know people involved, make sure you guys are researching, reading the fine print, really checking to make sure you are applying to the right thing that you want to apply for.
It's also concerning though, because like I've been listening to some of like Trump's conferences, and he always says how he's in contact with governors, and like even last week he was saying how he was in contact with Mayor de Blasio. So it's also concerning because if you're in contact with them so often, like shouldn't you know the policies that they're doing, and shouldn't they be advertising like the best program for these businesses?
Well, New York City is different than the U.S. government. Right? New York City and the White House.
Yeah.
They talk, but that's like saying, our class and Francis Lewis and Brooklyn Tech all do the same thing. right? Like the attendance policy at Brooklyn Tech is not the same at Francis Lewis, and at Francis Lewis is not the same as how I might handle it inside our classroom,
Yeah.
right? So that's the same situation here. Just because all three or multiple organizations communicate and talk, you can't consider that the federal government is going to tell de Blasio and New York City what to do. You know, because New York City has to be able to independently run their thing too. But I just find it disingenuous.
No, yeah, disingenuine that, you know, these people are doing that. They're kind of like scamming people, especially people that are at greater risk.
So, all right, let's move on. Just be careful, because I do agree this is risk. Speaking about risk, we did talk about briefly credit default risk. So, credit default swaps. What is the goal of any investment? The goal of an investment is to do what?
Make money.
Make money. On any investment,
Get a return.
the goal would be to make money, right? So even when you take out or sell bonds, right? When you buy a bond, your goal is to earn interest, right? When you buy bonds, you buy debt, you want interest, right? Thank you, Ethan. Yield is the key word. You want yield. So the bond seller gives you yield to buy the bond. Perfect. Then there comes a time where you can package like a mortgage-backed security, like we discussed. All of this quote unquote risky debt, right? The bigger the circle, the bigger the risk. You can package all of this into one MBS. Make sense? We're still there. We did this the other day, right?
Yes.
Okay. So once you do this, you also have the risk where this, can it default? Right? This is the risk. Can your investment default? Right? Can all of these people start defaulting and impact your yield and your return on the mortgage-backed security?
Yes.
So, what can you do? You can do what's called, let me change colors. You can buy protection. It's kind of like buying car insurance. All right? When you buy car insurance, do you want to use it?
No.
No, but you're damn sure glad you have it in case something happened, aren't you?
Yeah.
So if this is a AAA rated mortgage-backed security, do you need protection?
No.
Subhan, you said no first. Why not?
Because there's not as much risk versus junk bonds or junk graded levels.
Exactly. So there's really very little risk of defaulting. It's not junk related. Okay? It is not junk related. And Apple's not going to default. So you don't need insurance on that because you know you're probably getting paid with 99.9% security. That's why your yield is higher or lower.
Lower.
Lower. Thank you, Daniel. It is lower because you know you're getting paid back. All right? So that leads us to junk-related bonds. If you are junk or near junk, you might want to buy insurance on that. Does that make sense? That means you would pay someone to insure that bond. Does that make sense? In case something bad happens, the insurer will pay you back the principal of the bond. That is a credit default swap. That is exactly what that is. It is, and I quote myself, it is swapping credit default risk. Questions on that so far? Just that terminology. Swapping the credit default risk.
Yeah, I have a question. So does that mean that a CDS is an insurance to protect junk bonds from defaulting?
That's exactly what it is. But it doesn't prevent them from defaulting. So
Protect.
So now hold on. So the credit default swap is to protect your money. It's to
Okay.
protect your investment. The credit default swap will not prevent Tesla from defaulting. Okay? It will not prevent Loyal Caribbean Cruise Lines from defaulting. It will not protect Alaskan Airlines from default. What it will do, when it defaults, it will protect you if you own the bond.
Okay.
So let's go step by step. There's two ways this really works. One is they do not default. Two is the bond issuer does default. So again, we're just going to use Carnival Cruise Lines because you know what? They're whack anyway. We talked about them yesterday, $3 billion credit line, $3 billion in bonds, 12.5% interest. You guys all think they're going to go belly up, so let's run with it. All right. Their bonds are trash, junk, duty, and regardless the percentage they're going to pay, you know they're going to default. You might get 12%, but you're going to lose your principal. So that's their bonds. You think they'll default. Let's say they don't default. Okay. So here's Daniel. Daniel owns Carnival Cruise Line bonds. Make sense? Daniel owns Carnival Cruise Line bonds. Daniel pays Mr. Power four times a year. Why 4 times a year? Because what's the key word here?
Quarterly.
Quarterly. Okay, 4 quarters in a year. So Daniel pays me quarterly a specific amount of money for protection. I'm like his bodyguard. All right? If his bond ends up defaulting, I will give him money that he lost. However, if his bond doesn't default, I just continue taking quarterly payments every quarter for the rest of our contract. Does that make sense? So I do my risk management. He buys the bonds and then realizes, uh-oh, they might default. I do my risk management research on Carnival Cruise Lines, and I say, you know what? I'll pay you. I mean, I'll insure your bonds. Sure. Send me a check every single quarter because I did my research. And I do not think they will default. So I trust Carnival Cruise Lines. The protection buyer is skeptical. Does that make sense? And Subhan, the answer is yes. We'll get to that in a second. Does this make sense? If the company doesn't default, then Daniel's just paying me every quarter. Does that make sense so far?
Yes.
Good. Now, let's say they do default. Here's what happens. He owns CCL bonds. He's been paying me 4 times a year. And it turns out they defaulted. I will send Daniel the value of the bond. Daniel will send me the bond. But I will also keep his insurance premiums. So now, yes, I own the bond, and I will have to fight Carnival Cruise Lines to get my money. But I've also been collecting Daniel's money every quarter. We both are taking a risk. Daniel is taking the risk of paying me and not needing to pay me, like car insurance. You buy car insurance, but if you never get into an accident, then you don't, it's like you paid for something that you didn't use, right? That is what the credit default swap is. I am giving you protection, Daniel, and you're giving me money. And if you don't need the protection, but you're paying for it anyway, you feel safer, and I feel good because I'm just going to collect money. I'm sitting at home and getting passive income. Then, oh shit, guess what? They defaulted. God forbid I was wrong. Now Daniel's happy because he paid me, yes. But now I am actually going to give him the value of the bond, and he sends me the bond itself. But I do keep his insurance premium. And then it's now my job where I either lose money because the bond isn't paid back by Carnival Cruise Lines, or I'm going to be fighting Carnival Cruise Lines to pay me my money. And it's no longer Daniel's problem, right? Daniel was paying me that in case things go bad, it is my problem. So if things go bad, it is my problem. If things don't go bad, then I'm the happy one because I just keep getting checks in the mail. Take a second. Does that make sense? Because then I need to tell you what Subhan said. Okay. Ask me a question.
So when the CDS, when the bond defaults, you basically don't own the bond anymore.
So when the company defaults, the risk is that they don't pay you back the interest or the principal on the bond, right? The bond issuer, which would be Carnival Cruise Lines. So Daniel doesn't want to deal with that headache. Daniel doesn't want to risk losing everything in this bond. So Daniel's paying me. If they do not default, Daniel just keeps paying me. If they do default and Carnival Cruise Lines faces bankruptcy, then Daniel, because he's been paying me, I will pay Daniel the full value of the bond.
Okay.
And then I will own the bond. Then it's my job to fight Carnival Cruise Lines to get this money back.
Okay.
So I'm taking all the risk by doing the credit default swap.
All right.
I'm assuming the risk as the protection seller. I'm selling Daniel protection. I'm hoping that he doesn't need protection. I'm hoping that he's just buying it because he's scared and he's just going to keep paying me every quarter. But if it turns out the protection gets called in, I'm his bodyguard. I have to step in and I have to protect him. I have to send him the value of the bond. He will send me the bond, and then I will be the one that fights Carnival for that money, and he doesn't have to worry about it.
Okay.
Now, I'm going to go to see what I'm going to do what Subhan said first. Subhan's question is this. If the investment grade of the bond is lower, is the cost of protection higher? If you think yes, type yes. If you think no, type no. Is the protection, yeah, you guys already know. Yes, of course. Guys, if I'm taking a risk, right? Like, so Daniel bought the bond and he wants me to assume the risk because he bought a bad bond. Fine, you better give me a high percentage. So he gives me a really pretty quarterly payment every single quarter. And if it's AAA rated and he wants a credit default swap, that's fine. It'll be a low rate because there is zero risk on my end. But if you're giving me like a C-rated bond, oh, hell no. Hell no. If you're giving me a C-rated junk bond, you better bet that those quarterly payments are going to be big because that is a big risk I'm taking to protect you. Now, James then asked a question. And James, I love your question. Can you credit default swap a credit default swap? Does that make sense? So can you, ready? Let's whiteboard this. Can you guys see my whiteboard?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you swap a swap? Who gives me a yes? Who gives me a no? 1 for yeses, 2 for nos. Wow. That's everyone I counted so far. So some of you guys probably didn't vote, but that's fine. Yeah, you can swap a swap, swap the swap, and then swap the swap again, and then swap it out and swap it over and swap it and swap it and swap it. You can do whatever the hell you want because all you're doing is trading, right? All of this is paper contracts. I can take this contract that I have with Daniel, right? And I can then just say, hey, I'm going to sell my contract to you. Now it's you and Subhan. So instead of it being Daniel and Mr. Power, it is now Daniel and Subhan. Make sense? What if the CD seller defaults? So hold on, let's get out of here. Let's share this screen again. Okay, so what if the protection seller defaults? So you're talking about Citibank is the protection buyer, Goldman Sachs is the protection seller, and Goldman Sachs defaults and they cannot pay me the value of my bond. Right? Is that what you're basically asking me? Well, then you have the collapse of 07, 08, and 09. So now you've done credit default swaps. You took a risk as Citibank. Goldman Sachs took a risk in being your protector, and then the company defaulted and they cannot pay you back. This company, Goldman Sachs, now needs a bailout to pay their debt. Their debt is your bond. Does that make sense? This is what happens when you have the domino effect of an economic collapse. Because what slowly starts to happen is you start to see companies that are overexposed to risk, the butterfly effect. Exactly. So
Wait, can you repeat that? The bailout is your what?
well, the government bailout. So
Uh-huh.
Frida's question is this. Frida's question is, what happens if Goldman Sachs owes Citibank? Because Citibank has the bonds, Goldman Sachs is the protector.
Yeah.
Well, let's say that it's Tesla bonds. Now let's do Carnival Cruise Lines. Carnival Cruise Lines bonds, all right? Carnival Cruise Lines goes bankrupt. Their bonds are now worth nothing, right? So Citibank bought protection from Goldman Sachs. Now Goldman Sachs owes them the value of the bond. Well, Goldman Sachs ended up having way too much debt. Goldman Sachs can't pay you the value of the bond. They can't afford it, right? If they can't afford it, how can they pay Citibank? Therefore, Goldman Sachs cannot pay Citibank. So Goldman Sachs needs the government to give them money to bail out Citibank. Or the Federal Reserve Bank will need to come in, buy Goldman Sachs's bad debt, and pay back Citibank. Or Goldman Sachs goes bankrupt if they can't pay back all their debt. This is the risk of having too much risk.
But either way, it's not like Citibank's responsibility. It's Goldman Sachs
It is no longer Citibank's responsibility.
because they
It's
paid.
not.
They kept up with the payments.
They kept up with the payments, right? It is not Citibank's responsibility, but Citibank can get screwed because if Citibank doesn't get the value of the bond, Citibank loses a lot of money.
Oh yeah.
Because remember, they were paying Citibank quarterly payments, and then they were supposed to get the principal of the bond back from Citibank, and now they pay them quarterly repayments, and they're not getting back the value of the bond. Citibank just lost a lot of money. So now Citibank lost money. Goldman Sachs lost money from other investments they made. Then they couldn't pay back Citibank. Now Citibank doesn't have money because Goldman Sachs can't pay back Citibank, which means Citibank has to fire people to save money. Goldman Sachs has to fire people to save money. And this all started because Carnival Cruise Lines took on debt that they knew they couldn't pay back. And since Carnival Cruise Lines had debt, Citibank said, hey, we'll take the risk. Goldman Sachs says, hey, we'll protect your bond. We'll take the risk. Everybody makes a little bit of money until one person falls short. And then everyone feels the pain.
And the value of the bond consists of the principal as well as the yield that they would have received?
That kind of depends. Par value of the bond would probably be just the, I'd like to say the face value of the bond. Nicole, go ahead, go to class. I'm not super sure if par value is going to include your interest. I believe it's just the principal.
Okay.
All right, you guys have any, I mean, this is a lot. Yeah, so par value is the value of the bond when it was issued. Okay, so it's the face value of what you pay for the bond. All right. Guys, I will post this recording. Please make sure you take notes. At some point, I will be asking you to upload images of your handwritten notes. please, please, please take your notes in your economics notebooks. This stuff is really valuable stuff. And if you're just watching these live sessions, it is not giving you enough information that you'll be able to use in the future. God forbid you have to look back into these notes. Tasneem, have a good day. So you guys can take off. I'm going to head out because I have to actually go in and do some work for the Paycheck Protection Program for my wife's business. So I have to go handle that paperwork and those phone calls with the banks. I will communicate with you guys this weekend or Monday and how crazy this experience is going to be because nobody knows what the hell is going to happen. And I will let you know once I talk to Mr. Hood about rescheduling him for next week for you guys, okay?
Got it.
Guys, have a wonderful day. This is a lot of information, guys. This is college adult investment level economist stuff. So if you guys are really taking good copious notes and you guys are paying attention, I'm excited for the things that you guys will be able to do in your future and the conversations you'll be able to have in your college classes, but also when you guys get into any internships or interviews. It'd be really, really good for you. So please make sure you guys are taking those notes. All right, if you have questions, reach out to me. And I still suggest you watch all those movies this weekend because now you know what mortgage-backed securities are and credit default swaps. All right? I'll talk to you guys later this weekend. Have a good day.
Thank you, Mr. Power.
Thank you, Mr. Power.
Guys,
Have
have
a
a
good
wonderful
weekend.
day, guys.
Bye.
Peace.